In 2007, I stayed late at CD Baby in order to ask Derek Sivers, CD Baby founder, for his blessing to start a podcast with CD Baby's name on it. He said, go for it. Honestly, I don't think he thought I would actually do it. I then enlisted the help of Chris Robley and Chris Bolton, who no longer works at CD Baby, whom at the time spent every day with me in a tiny room answering calls from artists who never imagined it was possible to distribute music without a label. Robley was the artist with the indie street cred in the Portland scene. Bolton was the fellow podcast junkie that really wanted to work at This American Life producing radio quality podcast shows. And I was the ex major label artist turned indie advocate that just wanted every artist to feel empowered to pursue a music career on their own terms. We had our first podcast planning session during our lunch break since it still wasn't official work business. The goal was to come up with at least 10 episode ideas before we started recording to ensure we didn't podfade, the term used at the time to describe podcasts that die after a couple of episodes. Of course, none of us thought to bring a piece of paper to write this stuff down, and we predate the iPhone and smartphones. So we sketched out 10 episodes on a napkin at the Hot Lips Pizza on Killingworth Street in Portland, Oregon. And yes, it's a true napkin origin story. To me, that is the birthplace of the DIY Musician podcast, that Hot Lips Pizza on Killingsworth. 15 years later and over 4 million downloads, the podcast is going stronger than ever. And if you go back and listen from the beginning, it's a fascinating historical archive of CD Baby and the rise of the independent artist community as it becomes a force to be reckoned with that the mainstream music industry can no longer ignore. So that's the blurb I wrote for our origin story.
I vaguely remembered that. If you'd have said, where did we start it? I might have been able to tell you that pizza place. But what I remember even more than that is the conversation when you first said, hey, I'm thinking about starting a podcast. And I was one of those people that said, what's a podcast? And Chris Bolton, on the other hand, knew exactly. But it hit me as once you described what it was, I was like, that would be so great because you and I spent our days all day answering the questions of indie musicians as we were working in customer service at CD Baby early on. And I had gotten into this thing called cdbaby.org, which was a bit of a nightmare of a web forum where, kind of you could write long form content to answer people's questions in advance. So I'd been doing a bit of that. Here's how you book a tour. Here's how you do whatever. And then you described what a podcast was. I was like, oh, this could just basically be long form customer service in advance before anyone even has to call us.
Yeah. Yeah. And that forum that you mentioned, it was just called cdbaby.org. It was just like this forum that was there. That's also where Derek Sivers at the time would put a lot of his thoughts, many of which he grouped together and made one of his books that he released many years later. So it was just kind of before social networks where artists could go and interact and ask questions of us or the community at large, share ideas. And yeah, for me, it was one of those things, we had been distributing to iTunes since 2004. I didn't start working at CD Baby till 2006. So between 2006 and 2007, when we started the podcast, it was like every day talking to an artist who's like, I need a label, and me spending a half hour on the phone with them saying, no, this is why you don't need a label. You have all the tools, go build an audience. And then the next call would be like an artist saying, yeah, you've seen YouTube. YouTube was still relatively young and it was the Wild West of video. Not a lot of content moderation back then. You never know what you might see on YouTube back then. But an artist would say, yeah, I'm using this thing called YouTube and I'm making videos and I'm building an audience and I don't even have to tour anymore. And I'd be like, wait a minute. All right, let me write this down. Tell me everything you know. And I want to hear everything about this. And so for me, it was like, I love podcasts and I want to be able to share all of these conversations or types of conversations with the artist community at large. Because if everybody I talked to throughout the day could hear what this person just said about YouTube, it'd be amazing. And if all the artists could hear that keep calling us, asking, telling us how they get a label deal, could hear the conversation I had with the artists telling them they don't, it would be amazing and save us a lot of work.
We had such an interesting vantage point too on the sort of, I don't know, I'd say sort of modern rebirth of independent music because at the time in CD Baby customer service, not only were we servicing artists, but we were also taking orders over the phone for people who were purchasing music by independent
Yes.
artists. We were servicing the customers and the artists. And you'd notice after a while, oh, wow, this person who makes music exclusively about horses is selling thousands of CDs a week or a day. I don't remember. Or, this
It was
guy
a
who
lot.
only, yeah, this guy who only makes music about sailboats or this. It was just this like, super interesting look into niche artistry, sort of direct to fan sales. And we're like, oh, yeah, let's talk to these
Yeah,
people.
yeah, yeah. That I think that's an important piece of it. That, like you said, the unique advantage or vantage point we had was that we were talking to those fans, buying some very obscure music, and sometimes by the truckloads. And we would see those things moving serious units outside the mainstream that would never get talked about or even featured on any mainstream outlet or music industry outlet at that time. What are they doing? We want to know.